closed it. Mr. Speaker, we are better than this. The government has given us a press release. What we need is a plan. What is the scale of the refugee crisis that the government anticipates? What efforts have they made to coordinate a global response through the United Nations based on a clear assessment of the needs of Afghans, not numbers plucked out of thin air with no plan to implement them? If I were in his shoes, I would be moving heaven and earth to ensure we live up to our obligations and show the world we can be relied on, not least for those women and girls who we encouraged and supported to take on positions of authority and now find themselves the target of Taliban brutality. Where is the message from the United Kingdom that they are not alone? When the Prime Minister took office 2 years ago, we led the world in development assistance. But even now, after the Taliban have taken control, there is no urgency or seriousness about the humanitarian crisis that confronts us. Can we be honest? It is not honest to claim to be doubling aid to Afghanistan when just a few months ago it was cut in half. He should remember it, Mr. Speaker. The only statement he's ever made to this House on Afghanistan was when he came to tell us that he was cutting the aid budget. I wonder if he'll reveal, after this debate is over, that the refugee programme the government unveiled this morning will be paid for by raiding the aid budget. I will give way.
Speaker, you raised at the point of how many times the Prime Minister spoken of Afghanistan in the Chamber. Apologies. The Shadow Foreign Secretary mentions there the amount of times that the Prime Minister spoke about Afghanistan in this House. Can she please remind us how many times she has ever said the word Afghanistan in this place since she came to the front bench?
I'm glad she raises this point, Mr. Speaker, because it is a sign of a government that is...
It's not my responsibility. Please, let's try not to use you, because I'm not the example.
I'm glad she raises this point, Mr. Speaker, because it is a sign of a government that is increasingly desperate, that they launch these sort of desperate attacks. Let me tell her what we have been doing in recent months. In April, my colleague, the member for Wentworth and Dearne, told the Defence Secretary, now with the full withdrawal of NATO troops, it is hard to see a future without bloodier conflict, wider Taliban control and greater jeopardy for those Afghanis who work with the West and for women now in political, judicial, academic and business roles. Last month, my honourable friend, the Shadow First Secretary of State, said if we simply wash our hands and walk away, it is hard. They don't want to hear it, Mr. Speaker, because they have been warned and warned and warned about the consequences by members on all sides of this House, and they have ignored us. They have ignored their own backbenchers and they have abandoned the people of Afghanistan. It is a moment of shame and they should apologise. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is dishonest to claim to be doubling aid to Afghanistan when it was cut in half, and I wonder if what we'll find out after this debate is over is that the refugee programme that the government unveiled this morning will also be paid for by raiding the aid budget. The Foreign Secretary has said we can't just hand over funds to the Taliban. He is right, but that means we have to work harder and smarter. Has he mapped the capacity across Afghanistan to deliver aid? Has he spoken to the United Nations, who intend to provide a presence on the ground? When did he talk to them? What have they agreed? Has he spoken to the international NGOs who've been there for years? And why hasn't he yet agreed a common approach with the American government, who I spoke to last night? Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, no one will be reassured by the Prime Minister's remarks this morning. There was no serious plan to deal with the reality of Taliban rule or the threat to the UK. We went into Afghanistan to degrade the capability of Al-Qaeda after 3,000... A bit of humility from the Defence Secretary might be in order. Given what is unfolding in front of our eyes at Kabul airport, a bit of humility might be in order. We went into Afghanistan after 67 British citizens were murdered in the 9/11 attacks, and thanks to the success of our armed forces, there has been no terrorist attack launched from Afghanistan for 20 years. But now we've been chased from the country by the Taliban, giving encouragement to those who wish us harm. Our counter-terror operation appears to have collapsed. What can the Foreign Secretary tell us that he is doing to build up the intelligence picture beyond Kabul and share intelligence with international partners. He has got to outline today a strategy for dealing with the new reality we find ourselves in. What leverage does the government think, in practical terms, we can exert over the brutal Taliban regime that took power through violence, that displaced a democratically elected government, a regime that persecutes women, journalists, LGBT and religious minorities, to name but a few? We should be identifying any leverage that we have, freezing the assets of the Afghan government or central bank that are in UK accounts or financial institutions, developing sanctions with our partners and making clear the consequences of Afghanistan once again becoming a safe haven for international terrorism. Mr. Speaker, what we're witnessing is the absence of leadership. We hold the presidency of the G7. We're permanent members of the UN Security Council. We are leading members of NATO. But they are behaving as if they have no agency and no power, missing in action when it mattered, dragged to the chamber today to account for the greatest foreign policy crisis of our generation. It should be sobering for the government that not one single speech today has been uncritical of their approach. In the cold, hard light of the catastrophe unfolding in Afghanistan, their approach to the world looks so much less palatable than the global Britain gloss that they've tried to coat it with, slashing aid with shameful slogans like the giant cash machine in the sky that pulled the rug out from under people who relied on us, promising to maintain the size of the armed forces in the election and then cutting them to the smallest size for 300 years, needlessly, repeatedly trashing the alliances that we need in the world and our reputation, deliberately violating international law and shutting down safe and legal routes to asylum. Who can say now that that isn't a shameful decision given what we are witnessing in Afghanistan? The decision to withdraw troops, Mr. Speaker, did not need to lead to this. I've heard the Foreign Secretary say in recent days that there was no alternative but to leave like this, but it is not true. We could have used the last 18 months to plan our exit, to make clear to the Afghan people that we had no intention of walking away from them or their ongoing aspiration for democracy, to withdraw with care, planning and redoubled efforts to be a long-term partner to the Afghan people, even without our troops on the ground. The alternative to chaotic exit is not endless war, as he's tried to argue, but the patient, tireless pursuit of peace and a government that has the stamina to commit. We should be inspired by the troops, the aid workers, the journalists, the photographers, the support staff, the civilian contractors, the armed forces who returned to evacuate people in recent days, and the diplomatic staff, and most of all, the ambassador, who has embodied what courage looked like, who have stayed and remained to help those who are trying to exit. They stand for something important. They stand for a country that feels a deep sense of responsibility to our fellow human beings and believe that when we make promises, we should keep them. They stand for a country that knows that the world beyond our shores shapes the lives of people in villages, towns and cities across this country, and we cannot ever afford to turn away. And they are supported, as it turns out, by very many more people than we ever knew. In every nation and region, people believe that we can be a force for good in the world, and through this awful crisis, they have found their voice. Women's groups raising the alarm for their brave Afghan counterparts, journalists trying to get Afghan colleagues to safety, local leaders across this country standing up to welcome refugees. They know it's hard. They know we have to be in it for the long haul. They know it relies on give, not just take, to build friendships and alliances we can call on in times like this. A government that was honest with itself would see that alongside the United States, we have to have a broader set of alliances so we can operate an independent foreign and security policy again. Not to lecture EU countries to show leadership over refugees, but to do this ourselves, to lead by example with generosity and decency and step forward when it matters, not go missing when things get tough. A self-confident country is one that goes out with courage and conviction and sheds light, not just might, around the world. That is the light that we showed for 2 decades in Afghanistan. In short, Mr. Speaker, it is everything that this government is not. So today he has a choice. He could read out those notes that he holds in front of him, or he could tear them up and he could tell us the truth. How will we help them? How will we repair this? How will we rise to the scale of this challenge and show that we are a serious country again, prepared to engage in the world and stand up for values, especially when it is hard? He has hours, not days, to make this right with so many Afghan people and repair our reputation around the world. We have so much to be proud of as a country, Mr. Speaker. Can it again include our government?
Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking honourable members from across the House for their contributions today? And I believe the debate has demonstrated why this House's voice had to be heard and why it was right to recall Parliament. We heard important speeches, important interventions on all sides expressing deep concerns about the situation that we can all see now in front of our eyes unfolding in Afghanistan. Together we think of the sacrifices made by so many of our armed forces to keep us safe at home, to lay the foundations for hope and a better life for the people of Afghanistan. And I know that there are many honourable members across the House who have served in the armed forces, some in Afghanistan, and just how important that our response to the current crisis will be on all sides. Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, made a very powerful contribution on the gains made in the last 20 years in protecting and supporting women and girls. The honourable member for Ross, Skye and Loughborough made the case for Arup and the support that we give to those, and I hope that the Scottish Government will help us with that resettlement, and I will take him up on the overture that I think in good faith he made. I also want to thank the Right Honourable Lady for Camberwell, who I think spoke particularly powerfully about the generation of women and girls empowered by UK and Western intervention over the last 20 years. She's absolutely right that we must do everything we can to safeguard those gains that were made. My honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, made some important points, I think, about the over-centralised paradigm that had been applied in Afghanistan, and that was echoed by the honourable member for Birmingham Perry Barr. I think there was some agreement across the House about that. My honourable friend, the member for Plymouth Moorview, gave voice to the frustrations I know many veterans will feel as we withdraw. And he also made the important point, and I know he was referring to PTSD and other conditions, the importance of dealing with the mental health of our veterans at what will be a very difficult time for many of those. I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. I wondered if he would join me in paying tribute to the many brave members of our armed forces who've returned to face the world after their service in Afghanistan with life-changing injuries. And if he would also join me in thanking the staff past and present of the Defence Medical Rehabilitation Centre, which is now based in Stamford Hall in Rushcliffe, for the tireless work they've done to help them.
I thank my honourable friend. Look, we pay tribute to all of those who've returned and paid the price through physical or mental health injuries, and of course a huge tribute goes out to all of those organisations who are supporting them. Can I just make a little bit of progress? And I will come back to the honourable gentleman. I also thought the honourable gentleman for Barnsley Central spoke particularly, I don't know whether he's back in the chamber, but spoke particularly powerfully about the need for a concerted international response. And the Right Honourable Lady for Hackney North gave voice to her constituent, veteran Jack Cummings, and the sacrifices that were made by so many on the battlefield. My Right Honourable friend, the member for Chingford, also gave, I think, a very powerful speech and made the point that how we leave is as important, if not more important, than the question of withdrawal itself. And I can tell him, because he asked a specific question, that we tested very rigorously the approach with our US allies when they consulted us. The Right Honourable Lady for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford, I think, also gave witness to the many terrified Afghans who now face the threat and the risk that comes with Taliban control. The Right Honourable, I give way to the Honourable.
I'm very grateful. I've had lots of constituents get in touch today to say that the thing that they're most anxious about, and I think many members have reflected this in the debate today, is those people who are terrified in Afghanistan today, wanting to get out of Afghanistan. Many of them we're wanting to help get out of Afghanistan. But for some reason we're saying it's 20,000 that will take over several years, but only 5,000 this year. If the government could just simply say, whoever manages to get here this year, we will take this year, I think that that would be a significant advance.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? I come on to address that point, but I understand the point he makes. My right honourable friend, the member for North Shropshire, gave a courageous speech. I'm just going to make a little bit of progress. I think I've given way so far, and I will do when I come on to that point. My right honourable friend, the member for North Shropshire, gave, I think, a truly courageous speech. I welcome his contribution, and we welcome him back to the chamber. My honourable and noble friend, the member for Basildon, asked us about the application of ARAP to the British Council staff and whether indeed it applies. It does apply, and we are straining every sinew to make sure it can work and be applied to them as effectively as possible. And I'll come on to explain the practical arrangements and challenges we've had around that. I'll make a little bit of progress. There were many other heartfelt, insightful and truly valuable contributions in the House today. Mr. Speaker, I also listened very carefully to the Labour front bench, and the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the Labour Party, made clear his decision, his support for the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. I think that's clear. He listed a range of things he wants the government to do, quite rightly, including supporting the UN efforts, taking action in the UN Security Council, support through NATO, support for ordinary Afghans, and not allowing money aid to go to the Taliban. We're doing all of those things, and rightly so. The right honourable gentleman did not give a single example of an action he would have taken that we have not one, but then issued a series of searing criticisms. The Shadow Foreign Secretary took a similar approach in her speech, and I'll come to address the various points that she and he made. But I'll make a bit of progress, but I would welcome what she said about our Ambassador, Sir Laurie Bristow, and the team on the ground. In case there was any doubt, the Shadow Foreign Minister, the Honourable Member for Aberavon, said yesterday, we are, as the Labour Party, have no problem with the American decision to withdraw troops, unquote. So the leader of the Labour Party agreed to the decision to withdraw, but now with his predictable proclivity for hindsight, the right honourable gentleman criticises the consequences of a decision that he backed. And he does so with no serious or credible alternative of his own. Not even a hint, a reminder of Shakespeare's adage, the empty vessel makes the greatest sound. So, Mr. Speaker, in any crisis, it is how you respond that is critical, as my right honourable friend made, and the government has two overriding priorities. First, we must evacuate our own people, the British nationals, the dual nationals in Afghanistan who now want to leave, those who served our country so loyally, and allied to this, we must live up to the best traditions of this country in playing our part in offering safe haven to those Afghans who are now fleeing persecution from the Taliban as refugees. I give way to my...
I'm very grateful to the Foreign Secretary giving way, and it's absolutely right that the United Kingdom makes this generous offer to the people of Pakistan who need somewhere safe to come. But there is concern among my constituents that we don't, in being generous and open the door to those who would wish to come here and do us harm. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm that robust checks will be in place to ensure that no one who would wish to do us harm will be able to get through this route?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right. Of course we need to be open-hearted and generous. But if we were to allow people to come to this country who subsequently attack this country, we would be back in this House debating a very different set of issues. And therefore we need to make sure we have some basic checks in place. Also to make sure that the seats on those planes go to those we want them to go to. And I'm going to make some progress. I've been very generous. I'm going to make some progress. I want to pay tribute to those leading this work. I've already mentioned Sir Laurie Bristow, our ambassador. There's a phenomenal cross-Whitehall team of military personnel. I pay tribute to the Defence Secretary, Home Office officials. I pay tribute to the Home Secretary. And they're working hand in glove with gunfire overhead to save others before they get out themselves. And I want to pay tribute also to the rapid deployment team that flew into Kabul last night to support that effort, and to the troops that went in to protect them and secure the airport so that we could prosecute this evacuation effort. Mr. Speaker, we're straining every sinew on that evacuation effort, and it is supported by the crisis team in King Charles Street with Home Office experts, military planners, and they're working round the clock, and I pay tribute to them, having visited them yesterday. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank, very grateful to the Foreign Secretary for giving way. Can I specifically ask him about the Arab relocation programme? Will he expand it, not just to cover the British Council, but also those working for UK aid agencies, those working for UK contractors, who work for UK-funded programmes and who are also in fear of their lives, who are hiding from the Taliban, being chased by the Taliban as we speak? Will he include them in the relocation programme, as members from all sides have called for to happen?
British forces, we had thousands come in from the Americans. Without that, we wouldn't be able to get any of those to the airport, indeed out of them, or process them in the way we need to. The second strand of the evacuation beyond British nationals is the Arab programme, also set up by the Defence Secretary back in April, to help those who worked for us and who now face the risk of retribution precisely because of the loyalty that they showed to our country. And to date, Mr. Speaker, we've resettled over 3,300 Afghan staff and their families. That includes 2,000 since April, the most generous scheme of its kind offered anywhere in the world, and rightly so. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm most grateful to the Foreign Secretary in giving way, and I thank him for all he's doing. The United Kingdom led the way on the Friends of Syria group before in convening the international community on bringing forward a humanitarian package. Will the United Kingdom do the same with Afghanistan to get countries like the UAE, Jordan, Kuwait, who are also part of the NATO action in Afghanistan?
I thank my honourable friend. He's absolutely right to raise this. I'm going to come on to that point if he allows me to. The third strand of the evacuation scheme is, as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary announced today, our plan to provide a bespoke asylum offer to settle 20,000 Afghan refugees over 5 years. And like the Home Secretary herself, let me just say, as the son of a refugee, I am deeply proud that this government is continuing the big-hearted tradition of the British people in offering safe haven to those fleeing persecution. So we're getting our nationals out, those that work for us out, and we are providing a lifeline to the most vulnerable. I can also tell the House today that we have contacted all of the Chevening scholars in Afghanistan, not just to tell them that they can come, but to actively make arrangements for the upcoming flights to the UK. Mr. Speaker, at a time of crisis, we also need to look to the longer term, and there are 4 areas that need particular focus. Counter-terrorism. We must never again allow Afghanistan to be a haven for terrorists. We will work very closely with all of our partners within the parameters that the current situation allows. Secondly, the international community must be prepared to respond to the humanitarian plight caused by the Taliban's campaign. The UK is already using our convening power, our aid budget, to galvanise the global response. Thirdly, we must work to safeguard regional stability, and that will require us to work with different partners and require engagement with key regional players, including India, China, Russia, Pakistan, Central Asian states, however difficult or complex that may prove and outside of our comfort zone. And we will be fully supporting the efforts of the Secretary-General of the UN Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Jean Orneau. The fourth area is human rights and accountability. We will hold, both through our domestic sanctions regime, but also working with the Indians who chair the UN sanctions regime for Afghanistan, to make sure we can exercise a moderating influence on the Taliban regime. We will pursue each of these areas with vigour. As the Prime Minister has already made clear, we'll be convening a special meeting of G7 leaders to consider a concerted and coordinated response. We will be looking at the question of a contact group of international partners on Afghanistan, and we plan an event at the UN General Assembly next month to focus minds and raise funds for the humanitarian response. We are raising our aid budget in response to the...
Order. Under the order of the House today, I am now required to put the question. The question is that this House considered the situation in Afghanistan. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.